Well, hello and welcome to Movement Church Online. I'm Chris, I'm the pastor here at Movement, and I'm so glad and so excited that you joined us today for Movement Church Online. And today's a really great day to be here because today we have a special guest. We have a special guest in person, and we have a special guest online. And so our special guest online, a few months back in person, we had a wonderful friend of our church named Kaitlin Garrison who came and shared an incredible message. We have not shared that online, and so today we're going to be sharing that online with you. It's an incredible message called Unsought Battles, that sometimes the greatest things that we do is decide to not fight a battle that's not worth fighting. And so today Kaitlin's going to be sharing that with us. I hope you'll take some notes. I hope you'll share this with a friend. But we're going to go ahead right now to Kaitlin sharing the message Unsought Battles.
But it's so good to be here again. Like Chris said, I think this is my third time getting to come and hang out with you guys. And I say it every time, and I'll say it every time. But I love coming and seeing what God is doing in this church body through Chris and Jalen and through all of the movement team that help this happen every single Sunday, and to all of you who make up this church. So thank you for letting me be here. Thank you for letting me just kind of peek behind the curtain and see what God's doing over in Las Cruces. So like Chris said, my name's Kaitlin. I'm from over the mountain in the wonderful Alamogordo, New Mexico. And Chris and Jalen were me and my husband's youth pastors back in the day. They will forever be my youth pastors. But it's pretty funny because my husband Lance is now the youth pastor of the same youth group that Chris and Jalen youth pastored. So weird full circle moment, kind of crazy. But me and my husband Lance have a little girl named Jessa. She's 18 months, and last time I was here, I was super pregnant with her, so this is going to be a lot more fun and less tiring to talk. But she's 18 months old. She's talking, walking, going crazy everywhere. But when I'm not chasing her around the house, I'm a writer and an author, but I'm also a second grade teacher. I taught in the classroom for about five and a half or 6 years, and now I teach online, which if you're like, why would you do that? It's a lot better than COVID learning, and I'm loving it. Do we have any teachers, school staff, people in the room? Okay. Oh yeah, I love it. Everybody look at these people and say, God bless you. Teaching has been one of the neatest, most incredible and wild jobs I've ever had in my life. And here's what gets me about teaching is when I was taking classes in college, right, I started taking all these education classes that sound super sophisticated, and when you're taking them, it makes you feel like you're going to be this top-notch, really effective professor of 8-year-olds and just command control. I took classes like teaching pedagogy 201 or 101 or whatever that talks about discovering your teaching philosophy and your method, or lesson structure 201 that talks about designing really effective lesson plans that drive home the objective, or educator communication 301, understanding different learning styles and teaching to them, or children's literature 501 that talks about how to choose good books that lead to great lessons. And all of that stuff is so wonderful and good to know. But when I got into the classroom, I felt horribly unprepared, okay? And over the years, being in the classroom, I've come up with my own college classes that I really think that they need to add to the teaching catalog for aspiring teachers. Things that are the real things that you need to know, okay? Things like chair acrobatics 101, ending desk hopping, chair surfing, and table tumbling. If you're like, chair surfing? Yes, ask me about it afterwards. See all those lovely notes on the backboard for these children that come in here? This is what it looks like, feels like. They need all that, or it's chair hopping, chair surfing, and table tumbling. Things like outburst management 201, diffusing meltdowns without having one yourself. That one would have been helpful. Or classroom chaos control 301, dodging flying, you're nodding your head, she knows. Dodging flying shoes and chairs and teaching anyway. Or recess refereeing 401, ending friendship, breakups, fistfights, and other playground soap operas. Those would have been helpful before stepping into the classroom. And anybody who's an education major in the room is like, I'm changing my major tomorrow. Don't. It's a really great job. I promise. It's surprised me so much at how God has used it, but it's wild, no doubt. But this class would have really helped me out my first year of teaching, and that is Parent Negotiation 101. How to de-escalate angry parents without crying in front of them. So this one would have really helped me my first year of teaching, which was horrible for a lot of reasons. But one of them was that I had this grandparent who just hated my guts right off the bat. Day one was very skeptical, very distrusting of me. Not to mention she was super tall, so she kind of towered over me and she scared me. But she would come and find me every morning on the playground after she dropped her granddaughter off, and she would come at me with this laundry list of things that I wasn't doing right, things that I wasn't doing good enough, complaints, all kinds of not nice things in my direction about how I had wronged her or her granddaughter who was in my class. And this grandma made me feel so inferior and just like I was even more of a failure than I already felt like. She didn't know that I was staying at the school till 6 o'clock at night to try to get my life together, or that I was meeting with experienced teachers to try to get my classroom under control, or that I had 6 to 7 just extreme behaviors going off in my classroom all throughout the day. And so each day when she would come and find me, I just wanted to let her have it, right? And prove to her that I was doing a good job, that I was trying my best, and that I was barely hanging on by a thread. But I didn't, not because I had some kind of amazing self-control, but because at that point I was so hysterical that if I would have lost it, if I'd have lost it on her, I probably would have lost my job right behind it. So we didn't do that, but a couple months later, I had to have a meeting with her, and I invited the principal because she was so mean to me, and I needed some backup. But first thing, we sit down, and she just starts in with the accusations. And I don't remember what I said or how I said it, but I said something to the degree of, like, are you okay? Is there something I'm missing, something that I don't know about that I've done? And it was like a dam broke. This grandma was in a puddle of tears, talking about the awful things that their family went through, the terrible reasons why she had custody of her granddaughter in the first place, and how she had made it her life's goal that she would never let her granddaughter feel any form of neglect ever again. And so I'm listening to her going, okay, this is not even really about me. This is a lot bigger than me. We were able to talk things out and reassure her and all that good stuff. And after that moment, we ended up having a really cool relationship. She even hugged me after that. That's the miracle of this story. But what could have been this daily battle, right? It turned out to be this opportunity to partner with somebody that just needed to be heard. And looking back, I can see now that if I would have locked in and engaged in that daily playground battle with her, I would have been wasting my energy on the wrong battle. Because in the end, the victory didn't come from proving myself or fighting back or proving my worth to this woman, but it came from choosing not to fight those little lesser battles beforehand, which actually opened the door to healing and restoration later on. And I'm sure that all of us in this room could tell stories of the battles that we are tempted to engage in our daily life. Things like the coworker who always takes credit for your work. It could be the boss that overlooks you time and time again. Or maybe it's the family member who knows exactly how to push your buttons and hurt your feelings. Or maybe it's somebody's words being spoken about you behind your back or to your face, trying to hurt your reputation. And the truth is that we all face moments in here where we are tempted to fight a lesser battle. But the question that I want to dive into together this morning and ask you is, what if your greatest victory doesn't come from the battle that you win, but from the battle that you choose not to fight? And I believe that we see this idea of victory coming from battles that we choose not to fight played out in one of the most famous, world-renowned stories in the Bible, and that is the story of David and Goliath. And if you're like, hold on, that's not an unfought battle. That was like an incredible battle that they definitely fought. But hang with me. This is a pretty familiar story. A lot of us maybe have heard it, about a small shepherd boy who takes down a huge giant with some stones and a sling. He becomes famous in all of Israel then, and even thousands of years later now, we still talk about this battle, about David's bravery and his willingness to say yes. But this morning, we aren't actually going to focus on the story of David and Goliath, but actually on a small moment right before the fight between David and Goliath took place. And it's just a few sentences, and I've honestly overlooked it almost every time that I've read this story. Right before David fought Goliath, he had an opportunity to fight a lesser battle, one that if he would have engaged in, he might have missed out on the actual battle that God had ordained for him to fight, which was with Goliath. And so we're going to be hanging out in 1 Samuel 17. So just a kind of a quick refresher on this story and some context. The story begins with the Philistines, which is the enemy army, and the Israelites, who were the people of God, and they were facing off for battle. And so the Philistines have this champion named Goliath. He's 9 feet tall, and he's asking for one of the Israelites to come and fight him. And so for 40 days, at this point, for 40 days, Goliath is mocking and taunting the Israelites, asking someone to come and fight him. But all of the Israelites, even the king, was like, no, we ain't going to do it, because he's huge, right? So meanwhile, David, who was the youngest boy in his family, he's taking care of his father's sheep when his dad sends him into the battlefield to go check on his brothers who were a part of Saul's army and to give them supplies. So he leaves the sheep in the care of a caretaker. He grabs his stuff and heads down to the battlefield to check on his brothers, and that is where we pick up in verse 23. So he's there, he's talking with his brothers, and here's where we pick up, 23. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines, shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes." David asked the men standing near him, "What'll be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, this is what'll be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him, and he asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." So if you read further down in the story, you read about this wild victory that David has over Goliath in this unforgettable battle. But this part of the story, this dialogue between David and Eliab, this is like the prequel to David and Goliath, and we can call it like David and the distraction. Okay, so David hears the threats of this giant, and he starts to get curious and honestly kind of fired up about this fight. And so as he's volunteering for this terrifying job, his older brother Eliab hears him being inquisitive with other people, and it says he burns with anger and comes at him with all of these really hurtful words about why David is not the guy for this job. And I think the thing we have to understand about Eliab was that he was probably a good 15 years older than David. He carried a lot of stature and responsibility and respect as the oldest in the family, so his words would have carried some weight, right? And let's just think for a minute. Our family members know the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of us, right? And their words can hurt a little bit deeper because we're known by them. So his words most likely carried some weight, and they hurt. And so Eliab comes at David with these questions and accusations, saying things like, what are you even doing here? You don't belong here. Who did you leave those few sheep with anyways? It's kind of like an underhanded jab. And then he tells him that he's conceited and prideful and that his heart is wicked and that the only reason he's there is to see some action. And so right here, when we look at all of these things that Eliab comes at David with, he ultimately questions his significance, right? What are you even doing here? You don't belong here. He exploits his weakness. He tells him he's prided and conceited. And I don't know, David was the youngest of his family. Maybe he was a little bit cocky. I have no idea. But either way, he exploits his weaknesses. And then he disqualifies him from the battle. You don't have a purpose in being here. And mind you, he does all of that in front of people, right? In front of all these valiant soldiers who are standing around. So talk about feeling disrespected. So I think right here, David could have done a couple things with the words that were spoken over him. I think David could have engaged externally. Maybe he could have gotten really angry with Eliab and maybe physically fought him, but more likely could have fought him with his words, right? By defending himself, by firing back insults on why Eliab wasn't good enough to be there, maybe called out some of his shortcomings, or he could have spouted off all the reasons why he was more qualified than Eliab to be there. Right here, David could have engaged in an external battle with Eliab. Or maybe he didn't engage outward, but he could have engaged inward and engaged in kind of a mental battle of overthinking. Maybe thinking, well, maybe what Eliab said is true. I mean, what I do isn't really that important. I'm only a shepherd. What am I thinking? Thinking I could go fight a giant. I'm not even trained. I wouldn't even know what to do in the first place. Maybe this isn't a good idea. And he could have engaged and spent his mental energy engaging in a mental battle of overthinking and second guessing and self-sabotaging. But either way, had David chosen to engage in the battle with Eliab externally or even within himself internally, he would have taken his eyes off of the 9-foot enemy in front of him and would have missed out on fighting the battle that he was actually called to fight because he was too busy wrapped up in a lesser battle with the wrong enemy. And the same is true for us. And I don't know about you, but when somebody questions my qualifications or exploits and underscores my weaknesses or tells me that I can't do something that I feel really, really passionate about, all of that in front of people, that hits different. And I know I can't be alone in that. Like when your coworker questions your ability or makes you look bad in front of your boss and your peers. Or when somebody questions your leadership or even your intentions behind your back or in front of people. Or when a friend or an acquaintance publicly criticizes your parenting style or your family. Or when a keyboard warrior on social media or the internet criticizes your view, questions your credibility. All of these things and so much more are lesser battles that we encounter in our day-to-day. And if I could boil down maybe a definition of a lesser battle, I think it's essentially a conflict or a distraction that pulls us away from the greater battle with the enemy. And lesser battles cause us to turn in on each other and fight each other. It weakens our unity in Christ, and it leaves us vulnerable to sabotage from the enemy. And I can point to so many times in my own life where I have engaged externally in a lesser battle because I've let offense just totally cloud my vision, and maybe you have too. When we've let the threats and the accusations of people harden our heart, so much so to the point where we've made people the enemy, and we set our targets at them and start ready, aim, firing at them instead of the actual enemy. And Scripture says that the actual enemy of our souls is Satan. Just like Paul says in Ephesians 6:11-12, he says, "Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." That is our enemy. There are times that I've made people the enemy, but I can also recount a lot of times where I've engaged in an internal battle over the words that somebody spoke over me, that paralyzed me, shut me down from doing anything at all. But either way, when we engage in a lesser battle externally and fight other people, or internally where we're kind of turning in on ourselves, it causes us to turn our back on the real fight with the real enemy. And here's the unfortunate truth this morning is that for us, there are clear, real battles that the Lord has called you and I to fight. But this right here, getting caught up in these lesser battles and turning on other people externally or turning in on ourselves internally, both of those things distract us from the battles that are the Lord's. These lesser battles, they're kind of like the devil's playground, right? Where he just gets to do his work. And I need you to hear me out for a minute. I do not like to talk about the devil. You're not going to hear me talking about spiritual warfare a whole lot. I don't want to put a spotlight on him when I don't have to. But this is too relevant, too prevalent, and too important not to call out. Because I think it doesn't take more than maybe a 5-second glimpse out the window to see that this specific tactic of the enemy to pit people against each other, it's taking out marriages, it's taking out relationships and friendships and families and churches and so many other things. Because when the enemy can't directly destroy us, he will distract us and divert us to fighting each other and even ourselves instead. And if our gaze diverts from the actual battle with the actual enemy, Satan remains unchallenged while we do his job for him in fighting and tearing down each other. And that is a crazy thing to think about. But what I love about our story today is that David didn't engage in a lesser battle that was presented before him. He didn't explode and he didn't implode, but more importantly, he didn't turn his back on the fight that actually mattered. And I love the example that David gives us and what he did after all of these words were spoken about him. So let's look at what David did. In 1 Samuel 17, 29 through 30, David responds, "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can't I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter. So David turned away from Eliab, who hurt him but was not his enemy, and instead he mentally and physically shifted, walked away, and engaged in the battle that actually mattered with the real enemy, who was Goliath. And that's great when we read that, but how did he do that? And how do we do that? What do we do when somebody's hurtful words or actions spoken about maybe our qualifications or our character or even our shortcomings have us so in our head that we don't have the strength to turn around and go back to the battle that actually matters? I believe that this is something that the Spirit of God empowered David to do then, and he also empowers us to do now when everything in us wants to engage in a lesser battle. And I don't know what was going on in David's head when he made that decision to turn around, but I do gather a couple things from David's responses later on in this story of how he responded when somebody questioned his qualifications. 3 things that I think David knew about God that empowered him to turn around and put his eyes back on the battle that actually mattered. I think that David understood that, number 1, God rescues. When David said yes to fighting Goliath, he knew he wouldn't be relying on his own ability to rescue, but that he would be counting on God's rescue to come through. Later on in the story, in verse 37, when King Saul starts questioning his ability and how he's going to fight this giant, David starts recounting all of the times that God had rescued him before this moment. He says, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." And so David's confidence wasn't in him rescuing the people of Israel, but on God's rescue that he had witnessed time and time again. The second thing I think David knew is that God is the one who equips and God is the one who qualifies. David approached Goliath as the person that God made and equipped him to be and not who others expected him to be. I would imagine that the Israelites probably were expecting a experienced, valiant, and hopefully tall soldier to take out Goliath and not an inexperienced little boy. In fact, in verse 38, later on in the story, Saul tries to arm David with all of this really heavy soldiers' equipment, but here's what David said. He rejects it. And he says, "I can't go in these," he says to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." And so he took him off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. And so instead of going into battle in soldier's armor, he goes out like a shepherd, right? With his sling and the stones, things he would have been used to using and probably skilled with using as a shepherd. And so he wasn't pretending to be some strong, valiant soldier, but he went into the battle using the skills and the tools that God had already equipped him with as a shepherd and trusting that God would do the rest. The third thing I think that David knew is that God wins. David knew that his job was to say yes and to step into the fight, but that it was God's job to bring the victory. Before he faces Goliath in battle, in verse 47, it says that all those gathered here will know it's not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. And so he understood that the battle wasn't going to be dependent on his might or his strength, but that his role was to just step into the battle, say yes, and let God bring the victory. And I think because David knew all of those things to be true about God, he was able to turn his back on Eliab's hurtful words that echoed, "You are not enough for this." And instead of defending himself and trying to prove Eliab wrong, he didn't waste his time doing that. By human standards, Eliab might not have been wrong about some of those things. By a worldly and even a practical perspective, David didn't look like he was enough. But it didn't matter because David knew that this battle wasn't about his qualifications or his shortcomings, but it was about God's power and God's deliverance. And David trusted that God would fill in where he lacked. And the same is true for us. When we understand the truth about God and the fullness of his strength in us, it empowers us to turn our back on the wrong fight. And the question that I want to ask us this morning is to just think, is there a lesser battle that I am either currently engaging in, or maybe I'm about to engage in a lesser battle with the wrong enemy? And what truth do I need to be reminded of this morning in order for me to turn my back on that fight? And just like David was empowered to turn around and fight the actual battle that God had called him to, we're empowered to do the same. And if you're anything like me, maybe you're sitting here this morning and you're like, okay, you keep saying the actual battle. And David's was obvious. Okay, it was a 9-foot giant, but what about me? How do I know what the actual battle is for me? And as I was kind of thinking about that and praying through that when I was getting ready for this message, I was reminded of one of Jesus' last prayers before he was arrested and crucified. And it was so eye-opening to read when considering what the most important battles are. And while our individual circumstances are going to look different in this room, I think that there's 2 things that can be applied to those situations. 2 things that Jesus lays out right before he was crucified that were important to his heart then and should be important to our heart now. Because a person's last words or last prayers, they reveal a lot about what's most important in life. They reveal a lot about what battles are worth fighting for. And so in John 17:20-23, Jesus prays this. He says, "My prayer is not for them alone." This is the disciples. "I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message," that's us, "and that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them, even as you have loved me." And so when we look at this verse, and even if you look at the surrounding prayer in that verse, these 2 recurring things keep coming up. And I think it's 1, for those that don't know God, that they would come to know him and know his love. And 2, for those that do know God, that they would live in unity with Christ and each other. And so I think the heart of Jesus' prayer reveals 2 crucial battles for you and I. And it's that those who don't know God would come to know him, and that those who do know him would live in unity with Christ and one another in the family of God. And so when it comes to those who don't know God, I think it's important to remember that God's heart is to rescue and deliver people from darkness. But the enemy's tactic is to blind and deceive people and to keep them in darkness. And so there is great deception about who God is and what he's like and who we are as humans that are keeping people from knowing God. And our circumstantial battles, they might look like conflict in the workplace or with a friend or with a family member or a random person on the internet who doesn't know God, and they're rude and dismissive and hurtful and critical, and it kind of feels like we're just getting pelted with arrows from their direction. But the battle isn't over their attitude, and it isn't even with them. And that is so easy to say, and that is another thing to live out. But the real battle is over the fact that they are most likely hurting and lost and disconnected from God. And that's the real battle, that they would come to know God and know the love that will set them free. And it might look and feel like the person is hurling arrows at you and you just want to ready, aim, fire right back at them. Anybody else? Just me? But something shifts in us when we remember that the real enemy is Satan and that it's his deception keeping them in the dark. And that is where we aim our arrows. And what about those who do know God? God's heart for Christ followers is to be united with him, obedient to him, and living in unity with the family of God. But the enemy's tactic is to distract and divide us and even get us to demonize each other. And this one, I think, hits closest to home because as Christ followers, we expect more from each other. I know for me, sometimes I expect unity to look like uniformity, for us all to think the same and agree on the same things and have the same perspective, but that has just not been the case for me, and that is hard. And within the body of Christ, we will have differences in political viewpoints. We will have differences in how ministry or how church should be run. We will have personality differences. We will have difference in preferences on crunchy or not crunchy. We will have people offend us, and we will offend other people. But in the midst of those differences and offenses, it can be so easy to turn on each other and to turn our backs on the real enemy and to just fight each other instead. And if the enemy can get us to demonize the person that we are fighting, we are no longer a united front against evil, but this group of splintered people who are too busy fighting each other. And I think maybe the most disheartening part of all of this, and the part that gets me when I think about it, is that we see in Jesus' prayer that Jesus prays that his followers will be unified so that those who don't know God would see our evidence or our love as evidence of his love, and that they would be drawn to him. And it's hard to keep that at the forefront of our minds when everything in us wants to engage in a lesser battle. But just like we see in the life of David, it is the Lord who empowers us to turn around from a lesser battle. It's the Lord who empowers us to look beyond the person that is hurting us and to pray against the enemy's deception and control in that person's life. It's also the Lord who gives us wisdom as Christ followers to sharpen and challenge and call each other higher without breaking unity. And it's the Lord who empowers us to do all of those things. And at the end of the day, I know our circumstances are going to look different. Our tensions are going to look different. But I think that many, maybe not all, but I think many of the things that we face, circumstances, fall under the battle for unity within the body of Christ or for those that don't know God. And I believe that keeping the real battle at the forefront of our minds, it doesn't necessarily make things easier, but it helps us spot a lesser battle quicker and not engage all of our time and our focus on the wrong enemy and a lesser battle. And I'll tell you, this reality has felt very close to my life recently, and I found myself aiming flaming arrows and blaming the wrong enemy. And as I've been kind of working through that with the Lord, he keeps reminding me of a couple things. And I want to share those with you before we close today. And the first thing is, remember, people are not the enemy. The enemy is the enemy, and he is the one that we fight. The second thing is, remember the greater battle for unity and for souls, and think about what's at stake when we take our eyes off of that battle. And the third thing, remember that we are invited to fight on borrowed strength. This isn't about our qualifications or our shortcomings. This is about doing battle, about going into battle with the strength that comes from the Lord. And so I hope that those things encourage you as you go back into your workplace or into your families, your friendships, and your schools, or into really tense situations that feel really hard right now, knowing that the God of the universe empowers you to turn your back on a lesser battle and engage in the one that matters for eternity. So I just want to take a minute and pray over us all in living this out as we walk out today. So if you'll pray with me. God, thank you so much for this incredible church body, for Chris and Jalen and everybody sitting in this room this morning. God, I pray right now that you would just bring to mind, is there a lesser battle that we are devoting a lot of energy to right now? Would you bring it to our mind? And Lord, in this moment and even throughout the week, would you remind us of who we are in you, of who we say you are in the actual battle that you have put in front of us to fight? Would you bring that clarity to us this week? Lord, that we would only be engaging in the battles that really matter and not get caught up in fighting each other or even turning in on ourselves. Lord, help us to remember that and help us to cling to you and your strength as we do all of these things. I pray over our weeks, Lord, that you would protect us, Lord, that you would be with us, that you would teach us and speak to us as we go on throughout the week. We love you so much, God, and I thank you for movement and all that you're doing in this special place. We love you, and it's in your name. Amen. Thanks for having me, guys. We will see you next time.
The more I know, the more I find to love. The more I know, the more I can withhold my. Oh, I'm still amazed by who you are. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're holy. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're lovely. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're worthy. For as long as I live, I'll never get tired of giving you praise. With every day, another reason why. With every breath, another chance to give my heart. Oh, I'm still amazed by who you are. And somehow it never gets old telling you you're holy. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're lovely. And somehow it never gets old telling you you're worthy. For as long as I live, I'll never get tired of giving you praise. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're holy. And somehow it never gets old telling you you're lovely. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're worthy. For as long as I live, I'll never get tired of giving you praise. How can there be more when you've already been so good? How can there be more when you've already been so kind? What else can I say? Oh, I'm still amazed by you. How can there be more when you've already been so good? How can there be more when you've already been so kind? What else can I say? Oh, I'm still amazed by you. What else can I say? Oh, I'm still amazed by you. And somehow it never gets old telling you you're holy. And somehow it never gets old telling you you're lovely. Somehow it never gets old telling you you're worthy. For as long as I live, I'll never get tired of giving you praise. How can there be more when you've already been so good? How can there be more when you've already been so kind? What else can I say?
once again, thank you so much for joining us today for Movement Church Online, for worshiping together, for studying the Word of God together, for praying together. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, as we close, we have a few things we want to let you know. One really big, important announcement right here off the bat. For the next 3 Sundays, this is for our in-person family. For those of you guys who join us in person on Sunday, March 9th, March 16th, and March 23rd, we will not be meeting at Conley Elementary as the school is undergoing some construction. We will be meeting on those Sundays at our normal 10:30 a.m. time here in Las Cruces at Fair Acres Elementary out on Picacho, out on Highway 70. We're incredibly grateful that they've opened the doors to us while Fair Acres is under construction. But for the next 3 Sundays, March 9th, March 16th, March 23rd, we'll be at Fair Acres, and then we'll be joining back together at Conley on March 30th. So we want to make sure that you know that, so you know where to join us if you're planning on joining us in person anytime in the next few weeks. And then we also wanted to let you know the ways that you can give. If you want to be a giver, we want to make sure that you know the ways you can. You can give online, you can give with our Cash App, and you can give by sending a physical cash or check offering to our P.O. Box. But however and whenever you give, thank you so much for your generosity, for your faithfulness, for your obedience to God, for your willingness to keep believing and investing in the mission and vision of our church. It could not happen without you. All the ministry that happens in our church is possible because of your generosity. It is made possible because of your generosity. So thank you so much for being a giver and for considering giving right now. And then if you have a need, we would love to hear from you so we know how we can be the church for you. If there's a way we can pray for you, a way we can partner with you to meet your need, or if there's a way we can pastor you and simply be there with you, we would love to be the church for you in your time of need. So please reach out right now by phone, by Facebook, or by email. We would love to hear from you so we know how we can be the church for you. And that's all we've got for you today. Next week, I begin a brand new series called Revival Time, where we're going to be looking at the 7 resurrections in the Bible, the 7 times people were raised from the dead, leading up to Easter and culminating with the resurrection of Jesus. It's going to be a phenomenal series talking about how God raises the dead to life. And so I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll share this with some people online. I hope you'll join us either in person or online. And until then, I hope you have a great day, a great week, and I hope you'll keep being the